The silence in the restaurant was deafening as Marcus strutted in with his young, blonde fiancée on his arm, deliberately passing by the table where his ex-wife Claire sat quietly with a distinguished-looking gentleman in an understated suit. The smug smile on Marcus's face froze when the maitre d' rushed over, bowing slightly to Claire's companion, whispering, "Mr. Blackwood, we've prepared your usual private room upstairs." Only then did Marcus realize his mistake. Claire wasn't just dating anyone, she was with Alexander Blackwood, the tech mogul whose net worth had recently hit 11 figures. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected twists and sweet karmic justice, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more emotionally satisfying relationship stories just like this one. Now, let's continue with Claire's journey from heartbreak to unexpected happiness. Claire hadn't planned on falling for a billionaire. 3 years ago, her world had collapsed when Marcus, her husband of 8 years, announced he had outgrown their marriage and wanted to pursue a relationship with his 24-year-old administrative assistant. The divorce that followed was brutal. Marcus fought for everything, claiming he deserved the lion's share of their assets because his career had always been the priority. Claire, an elementary school teacher who had supported his early career and postponed her own graduate studies, found herself starting over at 35. "You look troubled," Alexander said softly as Marcus and his fiancée were led to a table across the restaurant, still staring in their direction. "Is that him?" Claire nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she took a sip of water. "I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd be here tonight." "Don't apologize," Alexander replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Nothing about that man deserves any emotional energy from you." Their meeting had been completely accidental. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, Claire had been volunteering at a literacy program in an underfunded neighborhood, seeking purpose in a life that suddenly seemed empty. Alexander had arrived as a benefactor of the program, without entourage or fanfare, genuinely interested in the impact of the reading initiative. He had noticed Claire's patient work with a struggling young reader, not her appearance or her availability. For weeks, he simply showed up as another volunteer, never revealing his wealth or status. Claire had been drawn to his genuine kindness, his thoughtfulness, and the way he listened as though every word mattered. By the time she discovered who he really was, their connection had already been established on something far more substantial than wealth or status. Marcus couldn't stop staring from across the restaurant. His fiancée, Brittany, noticed his distraction. "What's wrong, babe? You keep looking over there." "That's Claire," he muttered. "My ex. And that's Alexander Blackwood she's with." Brittany's eyes widened. "The Alexander Blackwood? The billionaire tech guy who's always on the business channels?" Marcus nodded, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. He had spent the past year telling anyone who would listen that Claire was probably miserable and alone, unable to move on after losing him. He had even, coincidentally, shown up at places he knew she frequented, always with Brittany on his arm, making a point to look happier and more successful than ever. But Claire hadn't appeared miserable at all. In fact, she looked radiant tonight, dressed simply but elegantly, laughing softly at something Alexander said. There was an ease between them, a comfortable intimacy that made Marcus's ostentatious displays seem hollow in comparison. Alexander was nothing like Marcus had imagined. He wasn't flashy or arrogant. He didn't flaunt his wealth through designer logos or loudly dropped hints about his success. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence, his focus entirely on Claire, as though she were the most important person in the room. Claire felt Marcus's stares like tiny daggers. For months after the divorce, she had practiced what she would say if she ever ran into him. She had rehearsed clever comebacks and dignified responses. But sitting here with Alexander, she realized something profound: she didn't need to say anything at all. The best response to someone who had treated her as disposable was to be genuinely happy without them. "Would you like to leave?" Alexander asked, noticing her discomfort. Claire took a deep breath and looked into his kind eyes. "No," she said firmly. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The weeks that followed were challenging for Marcus. News of Claire's relationship with Alexander began circulating among their mutual friends. His social media posts showing off his younger fiancée suddenly received less attention than Claire's quiet, purpose-driven life alongside one of the world's most eligible bachelors. But what truly shook Marcus wasn't the money or status, it was witnessing Claire become the woman she had always wanted to be. With Alexander's support, she had returned to graduate school to pursue her doctorate in education. She had launched a foundation focused on literacy in underserved communities. She bloomed with confidence that came not from Alexander's wealth, but from finally being with someone who valued her dreams as much as his own. Brittany began to notice changes in Marcus. His obsession with Claire's new life consumed him. "You need to let it go," she told him one evening after he'd spent hours scrolling through news articles about Alexander and Claire's latest charitable initiative. "We're getting married in 3 months. This isn't healthy." But Marcus couldn't let go. He had defined his own worth through the things he acquired: a prestigious job, a beautiful younger woman, the envy of others. Seeing Claire valued for herself rather than what she provided to someone else challenged everything he thought he knew about relationships and success. The inevitable confrontation came at a charity gala 6 months later. Marcus had pulled strings through business contacts to secure tickets, knowing Claire and Alexander would be there. He approached them during cocktail hour, Brittany reluctantly in tow. "Claire," he said, his voice louder than necessary. "What a coincidence. You remember Brittany, of course." Claire smiled politely. "Of course. Hello, Brittany. And this must be the famous Alexander Blackwood," Marcus continued, extending his hand with forced confidence. Alexander shook it firmly. "Just Alexander is fine. Claire has mentioned you." "All good things, I hope," Marcus laughed awkwardly. "She's been very gracious," Alexander replied simply. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Claire. "How are your parents, Marcus? I've missed them." The sincere question caught Marcus off guard. His parents had adored Claire, and the divorce had strained his relationship with them. They're well. Dad's retirement is going better than expected." Claire nodded. "I'm glad to hear it. Please give them my love when you speak to them next." The genuine warmth in her voice made Marcus suddenly ashamed of his motivations for attending the gala. For the first time, he saw clearly what he had thrown away, not just Claire, but the depth and authenticity she brought to relationships. As the evening progressed, Marcus observed Alexander and Claire together. They moved as a team, supporting each other subtly in conversations. Alexander never spoke over her or claimed credit for their joint charitable work. When Claire excused herself to the restroom, Marcus found himself alone with Alexander at the bar. "You know, I should thank you," Alexander said, surprising Marcus. "Thank me? For what?" "If you hadn't let Claire go, I would never have found her," Alexander said simply. "Though I can't imagine being foolish enough to make the same mistake." The words weren't delivered with malice or triumph, which somehow made them cut deeper. Marcus realized that Alexander didn't see him as competition or even as a threat. He was merely a footnote in Claire's story, a closed chapter before her life really began. Later that night, as Brittany slept beside him, Marcus stared at the ceiling, confronting uncomfortable truths. His pursuit of status and appearance had left him hollow. The relationship he had destroyed his marriage for was built on shaky foundations. Brittany was already showing signs of restlessness, her eyes wandering at events, her interest piqued by more successful men. For Claire, the gala marked a final release. Seeing Marcus no longer triggered pain or regret. His presence barely registered compared to the full life she had built. That night, as Alexander drove them home, she realized she had finally, truly moved on. "You handled that with incredible grace," Alexander said. Claire smiled. "There was a time when I fantasized about a moment like that, about showing him I was doing better without him. But when it actually happened, all I felt was, nothing. Not numbness, just peace. Alexander nodded. That's how you know you're truly healed. 3 months later, Claire received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Marcus, along with a check made out to her education foundation. Claire, the note read. I owe you an apology that's 8 years overdue. No check could possibly compensate for what I took from you, your time, your trust, your plans for our future. But perhaps it can help give some child the kind of patient, thoughtful guidance you once offered me. I'm trying to become someone better. Someone more like the person you always saw in me. Thank you for that final gift, showing me that true happiness comes from growth, not acquisition. Wishing you and Alexander every happiness, Marcus. Claire showed the note to Alexander that evening as they sat on the terrace of his, now their, home. Are you going to accept it? He asked. Claire considered the question. Yes, I think so. Not for him, but for the kids who will benefit. Healing doesn't have to mean rejection of everything from the past. Alexander smiled. That's what I love about you. You always find the higher path. 2 years later, Claire stood nervously backstage at a TED conference, preparing to deliver a talk on educational equity. Her work had expanded beyond her wildest dreams, impacting thousands of children across the country. Alexander waited in the front row, their infant daughter sleeping peacefully in his arms. As Claire stepped onto the stage, she caught sight of a familiar face in the middle of the audience. Marcus sat alone, his engagement to Brittany having ended months earlier. He gave Claire a small, encouraging nod, not as a former husband or a regretful ex, but as someone who had learned from her example how to become a better human being. Claire began her speech not with tales of heartbreak or redemption, but with a simple truth she had discovered through her journey: our greatest power lies not in what we acquire or achieve, but in how fully we become ourselves. And sometimes, the people who leave our lives give us the greatest gift of all, the space to discover who we truly are. In the years that followed, Claire's life continued to unfold with purpose and joy. Her relationship with Alexander deepened through challenges and triumphs. Her foundation expanded internationally. The pain of her divorce became a distant memory, not erased, but transformed into wisdom that helped her appreciate the authentic love she had found. Marcus eventually found his own path to genuine happiness, starting a mentorship program for young professionals that emphasized ethics and work-life balance. He and Claire occasionally crossed paths at philanthropic events, exchanging polite conversation without bitterness or regret. And so, the story that began with an ex-husband's shallow attempt to provoke jealousy ended with something far more valuable: the understanding that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts or status symbols. It lies in becoming the person you were meant to be, and finding those who love that person completely. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a much better story. Remember, the best revenge isn't showing off what someone else is missing, it's becoming so completely yourself that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss.